Michael and Laura had always dreamed of finding a peaceful, comfortable place to call home. After years of renting cramped apartments and moving from one neighborhood to another, they finally decided it was time to settle down. They wanted a place with quiet streets, neat lawns, and friendly neighbors. They imagined themselves waking up on weekends to the smell of freshly cut grass, sharing cups of coffee on a sunny porch, and feeling completely safe in their own neighborhood. After months of searching online and visiting dozens of properties, they stumbled upon a beautiful house tucked away in a quiet, upscale community. The house was modest but charming, with white shutters that contrasted nicely with the soft beige walls. A small garden bloomed with colorful flowers along the walkway, and a wooden swing hung invitingly from a sturdy oak tree in the front yard. The moment they stepped inside, Michael and Laura felt a warmth they hadn't experienced in other houses. It felt like home, not just a building, but a place where they could imagine spending years together building memories. The neighborhood itself seemed perfect. Neighbors waved politely from their driveways, and children rode bikes along the sidewalks. The streets were lined with trees, their leaves whispering in the gentle breeze, and every house looked well cared for. They even noticed a small community park at the end of the street, where families gathered to picnic and play. Everything about the place felt safe and welcoming. Before signing the papers, Michael and Laura made sure to check the homeowners association rules. They wanted to understand what living in such a community meant. The HOA's rules were detailed but seemed manageable at first. Guidelines about lawn care, noise, parking, and the appearance of homes. At the time, these rules felt like minor suggestions rather than restrictions. They figured that as long as they maintained their property and respected the neighbors, there wouldn't be any issues. The day they moved in was filled with excitement. Michael drove the moving truck while Laura followed in her car, excitedly pointing out where each piece of furniture should go. Friends came to help unload boxes, and by evening, most of their belongings were arranged neatly inside. The house truly felt like theirs. They celebrated their first night by cooking dinner together in their new kitchen and sitting on the porch, enjoying the quiet calm of the neighborhood. In the beginning, life was exactly what they had hoped for. Their neighbors were friendly but respectful, and Michael and Laura felt a sense of belonging they hadn't experienced before. They joined the neighborhood community events, attended small gatherings, and even helped organize a block party. Everything seemed perfect. But as the days passed, they began to notice that not everything in the neighborhood was as peaceful as it appeared. There was one resident who stood out, a woman named Karen. From the moment they met her, Michael and Laura sensed her strict, controlling nature. She seemed to take the HOA rules very seriously, perhaps more seriously than anyone else. While most neighbors saw rules as suggestions to keep the community tidy, Karen appeared to treat them as laws that must be followed without exception. Karen was always watching. She kept track of every minor detail in the neighborhood. If a mailbox was slightly crooked, she noticed. If a car was parked for too long in the wrong spot, she noticed. Her eyes seemed to scan the community constantly, searching for any sign of what she considered misbehavior. While most people ignored these small imperfections, Karen seemed determined to enforce every rule to the letter. Michael and Laura tried to avoid conflicts. They didn't want to get caught up in unnecessary disputes. They mowed their lawn regularly, painted their house as required, and followed all visible rules. Yet Karen's watchful presence made them feel constantly on edge. Every time they walked their dog or parked their car, they felt as though someone was silently judging them. Despite Karen's intimidating personality, life remained mostly peaceful. Michael and Laura continued to enjoy their mornings in the sun, their quiet evenings on the porch, and weekends exploring local parks and shops. The neighborhood had many positives, and they tried to focus on those instead of one resident who seemed overly strict. They shared laughs, cooked meals, and gradually built a routine that felt comfortable and happy. Over time, Michael and Laura also noticed something else about Karen. She wasn't just strict. She seemed to enjoy asserting control over everyone around her. She often called neighborhood meetings, reminding residents of the rules and insisting that everyone comply fully. At first, Michael and Laura thought it was harmless. Perhaps Karen simply cared deeply about the community. But the more they observed, the more it became clear that Karen's behavior could sometimes go too far. She had a reputation among the neighbors as someone who might exaggerate minor issues or even create conflicts where none existed. Michael, being a judge in the county, had seen many disputes over property, rules, and regulations. He knew that most disagreements could be resolved calmly, with understanding and communication. However, he also understood that some people enjoyed pushing boundaries and testing others' patience. He warned Laura that they should remain careful and polite, but not let themselves be intimidated unnecessarily. Laura agreed, although the thought of dealing with Karen was sometimes stressful. One afternoon, Michael and Laura were enjoying a quiet day at home when they noticed a letter slipped under their door. The envelope was official-looking, stamped with the HOA logo. Laura picked it up curiously, expecting a friendly reminder about dues or community news. Instead, she read the contents and immediately felt a sinking sensation in her chest. The letter stated that they were being fined $3,500 for a violation of HOA rules, a fine that seemed absurdly large for what they had done, which was allegedly leaving their trash bin visible for a few hours after collection. Michael and Laura were shocked. $3,500 was a huge amount, and the reason seemed trivial. They read the letter several times, hoping they had misunderstood something, but the message was clear. The HOA insisted that the fine be paid immediately, or further action would follow. Laura was frustrated and confused. She had followed the rules as best as she could and couldn't understand how something so minor could result in such a serious penalty. Michael, with his experience as a judge, reassured her that they could handle the situation. He explained that fines had to follow legal guidelines, and many HOA boards overstepped their authority, especially in cases like this. Still, the thought of dealing with Karen directly was daunting. Michael reminded Laura to remain calm and not respond impulsively. They would research the law, review their HOA agreement, and prepare a response if necessary. Despite Michael's reassurance, the tension in their home was undeniable. They had come to this neighborhood for peace and comfort, yet suddenly felt as if they were under constant scrutiny. Every interaction with Karen and other HOA officials would now carry a layer of anxiety. Even simple things like taking the trash out or parking their car began to feel stressful. The first part of their story is not just about moving into a new neighborhood. It's about the collision between their desire for a calm, happy home and the reality of living under someone else's strict interpretation of rules. Michael and Laura had thought they were entering a peaceful community, but they were quickly learning that even the most beautiful neighborhoods can have hidden challenges. Little did they know, this fine was only the beginning of a series of events that would test their patience, challenge their principles, and ultimately reveal the power dynamics hidden beneath the calm surface of suburban life. What started as a simple letter about a trash bin would soon escalate into an encounter that neither Michael nor Laura could have anticipated. An encounter that would involve the law, their authority, and the surprising reactions of the people around them. Through it all, Michael and Laura remained determined. They knew that no matter how strange or frustrating a situation might become, their focus was on fairness, justice, and maintaining the life they had worked so hard to create. And so, their story in this seemingly perfect neighborhood began, a story that would unfold in ways they could never have imagined. After receiving the shocking letter from the HOA, Laura sat at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope as if it were a puzzle she couldn't solve. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from frustration. $3,500 was not a small amount of money, especially for something that seemed so minor. She read the fine again and again, hoping that maybe a detail would reveal itself that made it more reasonable. But it was clear. The HOA was serious and Karen was determined. Michael, seeing Laura's stress, poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from her. "We'll figure this out," he said calmly, though he too felt the strange tension creeping into their otherwise peaceful home. "First, we need to understand exactly what the HOA rules say, and whether this fine is even valid." He took out a notebook and began writing down notes. Laura watched him, appreciating his calm, methodical approach. She knew he had faced difficult disputes before, but this one felt personal, especially with Karen involved. The next morning, Laura tried to act as if nothing had happened. She went about her routine, taking out the trash and tidying the yard. Yet every small action felt scrutinized. She couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was watching, waiting for the smallest mistake. The thought made her nervous, and she realized that living in this community would require constant awareness of not just the rules, but also the people enforcing them. A few days later, Michael and Laura decided to visit the HOA office to speak directly with someone about the fine. They wanted clarity, not confrontation. As they entered the small office, they noticed the receptionist's polite but slightly tense expression. The office walls were lined with framed rules, regulations, and photographs of the neighborhood committees. Every detail reminded them that this was more than just a casual community. It was a highly regulated environment, where even small actions had consequences. The HOA manager, a middle-aged woman with sharp features and a clipboard always in hand, greeted them. Laura explained the situation calmly, while Michael emphasized that they wanted to understand the legal basis for the fine. The manager listened, but her responses were vague. "The fine is issued according to our rules. We expect compliance from every resident," she said, without addressing whether the fine amount was reasonable or if exceptions could be made. Laura felt her frustration building. "But $3,500 for leaving a trash bin out a few hours?" she asked. "It seems excessive." The manager simply repeated, "The rules are clear. The fine must be paid." Laura realized quickly that arguing here would achieve nothing. She and Michael thanked the manager politely and left, but the tension followed them back home. At home, Michael began to research state HOA laws, reading cases and rulings that involved fines and penalties. He wanted to be fully prepared. Laura watched as he highlighted passages, made notes, and typed letters on his laptop. The couple realized that while HOAs have the authority to enforce rules, there are legal limits, especially regarding fines that seem unreasonable or punitive. Michael explained these details to Laura carefully, helping her understand that their next steps would be both strategic and measured. Meanwhile, Karen seemed to sense their hesitation to pay. She began sending emails, each more urgent than the last. In one, she reminded them that unpaid fines could lead to additional penalties, legal action, or even liens against their home. The tone was sharp and insistent, making it clear that Karen was willing to escalate the situation at every turn. Laura felt a mix of anger and disbelief. How could one person hold so much control over a community? And why did she feel as though Karen was personally targeting them? Despite the pressure, Michael encouraged patience. "We don't need to react impulsively," he said. "If we follow the proper steps, we'll handle this correctly. Rules exist for a reason, but they can't be abused. That's where the law protects us." Laura nodded, though deep down she worried about the social tension this might create. Living in a neighborhood where one person wielded so much influence could be stressful, and she wondered if other neighbors had faced similar challenges but chose to remain silent. As days passed, the tension grew. Laura began noticing small things. Karen's car parked near their house at unusual times, brief visits from HOA representatives just to check on minor issues, and whispered comments from neighbors who seemed unsure whether to intervene. Each of these incidents added a layer of anxiety, making even routine chores feel complicated. Michael tried to reassure her, reminding her that these actions were more about intimidation than legality. Yet the constant vigilance was exhausting. One evening, after a particularly stressful day, Michael and Laura discussed possible options. Paying the fine felt wrong. It would reward unreasonable behavior. Ignoring it could escalate matters further, but Michael believed the law was on their side. They decided to respond formally, sending a detailed letter explaining their position, citing HOA rules, and requesting evidence for the fine. Michael wanted to create a paper trail, documenting their reasonable efforts to comply while challenging the excessive charge. The response letter was sent via certified mail, and now came the waiting. Days felt longer than usual. Every knock at the door made Laura jump slightly, unsure if it would be another representative coming to enforce the fine. Michael, meanwhile, remained steady, checking his emails, reviewing letters, and making sure their documentation was thorough. He wanted to be ready for any escalation but remained hopeful that reason would prevail. Karen, however, did not respond with reason. Instead, she escalated the situation further. One morning, Laura noticed a small envelope slipped under the door. Her heart sank. It was another notice, this time claiming that the unpaid fine had resulted in additional penalties. The amount had grown and the language was stern. The letter suggested that the next step could involve law enforcement if compliance was not achieved. Laura felt panic rise in her chest. Law enforcement? Over a trash bin? It seemed absurd, almost unreal. Michael, seeing her distress, held her hand and explained calmly, "This is exactly what we prepared for. They are trying to intimidate us, but we know our rights. We'll handle this. We just need to remain methodical and calm." Laura nodded, appreciating his strength, but inside she still felt a mix of fear and disbelief. How could a community dispute escalate to this level? The next few days were tense. Every interaction with neighbors, every glance at Karen's house, and every envelope in the mailbox carried anxiety. Laura and Michael continued to follow their routine, but the undercurrent of stress was unavoidable. Even simple tasks like taking out the trash or checking the mailbox felt heavy with expectation. Karen's watchful eyes seemed to follow them everywhere, and the couple realized that living in this neighborhood meant constant awareness, vigilance, and careful consideration of every minor action. Yet, amid the tension, Michael and Laura found moments of humor and support. Neighbors who had quietly observed the situation began offering subtle support, small gestures like a wave, a smile, or a friendly comment about keeping lawns tidy. It reminded them that while Karen was controlling, not everyone in the neighborhood agreed with her approach. These small interactions gave Laura and Michael hope that reason and community would eventually prevail. As the struggle continued, they also discovered the importance of teamwork. Michael's legal knowledge and calm demeanor balanced Laura's emotional insight and attention to detail. Together they strategized, planned, and prepared for the next steps, knowing that patience, careful documentation, and clear communication would be essential. They realized that this situation, while stressful, also offered an opportunity to stand up for fairness and to navigate challenges together as a team. Through it all, one lesson became clear. Living in a community meant balancing respect for rules with awareness of individual behavior. Michael and Laura understood that not every resident would enforce rules with kindness or reason, and some might even exploit their position. But they also understood that maintaining their dignity, following the law, and responding thoughtfully could turn a difficult situation into a manageable one. By the end of this part of their story, Michael and Laura had faced the reality of an unreasonable fine, understood the stakes of ignoring or paying it, and prepared themselves mentally and legally for what might come next. Their life in the neighborhood had begun with excitement and peace, but now included tension, strategy, and the realization that even small actions could have large consequences when dealing with someone like Karen. The struggle was real, intense, and at times frustrating, but it also revealed the strength, patience, and resilience of Michael and Laura. They were determined to navigate this challenge without losing their sense of fairness, humor, or hope. And little did they know, the next stage of this story would bring them face to face with a moment that no one in the neighborhood could have anticipated. A moment where authority, law, and community clashed in a surprising, unforgettable way. The days following their letter to the HOA were filled with uncertainty. Michael and Laura tried to maintain normal routines, but every small sound outside the house made their hearts race. Was it another note slipped under the door? Was Karen driving by to check on them? They even began to notice neighbors glancing their way more than usual, some with curiosity, others with cautious sympathy. The atmosphere in the neighborhood, which had once felt calm and welcoming, now carried a quiet tension, almost as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. One Tuesday morning, Laura was watering the garden when she noticed Karen standing near the end of the street, her hands on her hips, her gaze fixed on their house. Karen didn't wave or smile. She just stared. Laura felt a chill run down her spine. She hurried back inside and called Michael, who reassured her in a calm voice that they had done nothing wrong. But even as he spoke, he could sense the underlying anxiety in her tone. This situation had become more than just an HOA dispute. It was beginning to feel personal. That afternoon, a sudden knock at the door startled them. Michael opened it to see two uniformed police officers standing there, their expressions polite but firm. Laura froze in shock. What's happening?" she whispered. The officers introduced themselves and explained that they were responding to a complaint filed by the HOA regarding non-compliance with rules. Michael's heart sank, realizing immediately that Karen must have called the authorities. Laura felt a surge of panic. She had expected tension, emails, and perhaps legal letters, but she had never imagined that police officers would come to their home over something as trivial as a trash bin. Her mind raced with questions. Could the officers enforce the fine? Could this escalate into a legal issue beyond the HOA's authority? She glanced at Michael, searching for reassurance. Michael, calm as ever, invited the officers in. He explained the situation politely and provided copies of the correspondence between themselves and the HOA. He described the steps they had taken to dispute the fine, including sending their certified letter. The officers listened attentively, taking notes. Michael noticed that they occasionally glanced at him with a hint of surprise, though he couldn't yet tell why. Laura could feel her stress mounting. She had always trusted Michael's judgment, but the idea of police involvement made her uneasy. She watched as one officer paused mid-sentence, his eyes widening slightly. Michael, sensing the shift in tone, continued to speak clearly, outlining the legal limits of HOA fines and the protections residents had under state law. He emphasized that the couple had acted responsibly, communicated with the HOA in writing, and sought to resolve the situation fairly. The officers exchanged a brief glance. One of them cleared his throat. "Wait, you're Judge Michael Reynolds?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Michael nodded, confirming his position in the county. The officer froze for a moment, processing the fact that the homeowner standing calmly in front of them was, in fact, a respected judge. Laura could hardly believe what she had just heard. For a few tense seconds, the room was silent. The officers seemed unsure how to proceed. Their initial demeanor of authority, intended to intimidate, had vanished. Now they were faced with a situation that none of their training had prepared them for: enforcing a minor HOA complaint against a sitting judge. Michael, noticing the hesitation, maintained his calm, letting the silence work in his favor. Laura, though still anxious, began to feel a glimmer of hope. Finally, the officer spoke. "Ma'am, sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said carefully. "Our role is not to enforce fines in this situation. We respond to complaints, but this falls outside our authority." Karen's complaint had prompted an official response, but the law limited the police from acting directly in HOA matters. Michael nodded, understanding that the escalation she had initiated was now reaching its natural limit. Laura exhaled slowly, relief washing over her, but also frustration. The idea that Karen had involved law enforcement over something so minor felt absurd. Michael, sensing her thoughts, placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," he said gently. "This is exactly why we documented everything. Karen's actions are more about intimidation than legality. Now the situation is clearly on our side." The officers left shortly after, leaving Michael and Laura alone in their home. The quiet that returned felt almost surreal. Laura leaned against the doorway, trying to process the events. "Can you believe she actually called the cops?" she asked, shaking her head. Michael smiled faintly. "She underestimated the situation," he said. "She thought fear and escalation would make us comply. She didn't realize that we had the knowledge and preparation to handle it." Despite the relief, the incident marked a turning point. Laura realized just how far Karen was willing to go to assert control. It wasn't just about enforcing rules anymore. It was about demonstrating power and intimidating neighbors. Michael explained that some people used positions within community organizations to exert influence, sometimes crossing lines that should never be crossed. Laura felt a mix of anger and disbelief. How could someone become so focused on minor violations that they would involve law enforcement unnecessarily? In the following days, Karen seemed quieter. Perhaps she realized her attempt to escalate the situation had failed. Yet her presence was still felt in subtle ways: glances through windows, whispered comments in the neighborhood, and sudden visits from HOA officials. Michael and Laura maintained their routine, but the tension lingered, a reminder that living in this community required vigilance. Laura found herself reflecting on the experience. The anxiety had been exhausting, but it had also revealed important truths about resilience and the need for careful planning. Michael's calm approach, combined with clear documentation and knowledge of the law, had prevented a potentially humiliating or costly situation. She realized that preparation and patience were powerful tools when dealing with unreasonable people or systems. Meanwhile, Michael continued his research into HOA laws, even consulting a few colleagues informally about the situation. He wanted to ensure that every step they took was legally sound and defensible. The couple also began talking to a few trusted neighbors, quietly discovering that others had faced similar issues, but lacked the confidence or knowledge to respond. It became clear that Karen's behavior was not isolated. She had developed a pattern of intimidation over time, targeting residents she perceived as less likely to push back. This revelation gave Laura and Michael both a sense of responsibility and clarity. They realized that standing up to unreasonable authority wasn't just about protecting themselves. It was also about setting a precedent, showing other residents that it was possible to challenge unfair practices without confrontation or anger. It was a delicate balance, but they were committed to doing it right. As the week ended, the couple reflected on how far the situation had escalated in just a short period of time. What began as a simple HOA fine had turned into a full-blown confrontation involving law enforcement, documentation, and community observation. Michael and Laura understood that this was the lowest point of the experience. It was emotionally draining, stressful, and at times felt unfair, but in facing it directly, they had discovered strengths they hadn't fully recognized in themselves before. Laura realized that fear and anxiety, while natural, could be managed with careful planning and support. Michael's calm demeanor and legal expertise had provided a strong anchor in the storm. They learned that when faced with unreasonable behavior, reacting impulsively could worsen the situation, while thoughtful, methodical action could lead to resolution. The lowest point also revealed the true character of the people involved. Karen's extreme measures highlighted her controlling nature, while the response of the police officers showed that even authority figures could adapt when faced with an unexpected situation. Michael and Laura saw that human behavior, whether motivated by fear, authority, or stubbornness, often had layers of complexity. Understanding those layers allowed them to navigate the conflict more effectively. By the end of Part 3, the couple had faced their most intense challenge yet. The HOA fine, Karen's escalation, and the involvement of law enforcement had pushed them to the edge of their patience, yet they remained intact, their resolve strengthened by the experience. They understood that the coming days would require continued vigilance, strategic thinking, and careful communication. Even in the midst of stress, there were small victories. Michael and Laura had maintained their composure, documented every interaction, and ensured that the law protected them. The incident with the officers had diffused a potentially volatile situation, proving that preparation and knowledge could counteract intimidation. Laura felt a sense of pride and relief, realizing that they had navigated the lowest point without compromising their principles or dignity. This part of their story was a powerful lesson. Conflicts, even over seemingly minor issues, could escalate quickly when driven by personal agendas. But resilience, clear thinking, and the support of trusted allies could turn a stressful situation into a manageable one. Michael and Laura were ready to face the next stage of this journey, knowing that while challenges would continue, they had the tools and confidence to overcome them. After the tense encounter with the police officers, Michael and Laura felt a mix of relief and cautious optimism. The immediate threat had passed, but they both knew the situation with Karen and the HOA was far from over. It was clear that Karen's strategy of intimidation had failed, but she was not the kind of person to quietly accept defeat. The couple understood that they needed a thoughtful plan if they were to resolve the conflict permanently, rather than just temporarily. That evening, Michael sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open, reviewing state laws and HOA regulations once again. Laura joined him, notebook in hand, ready to take notes. Michael explained carefully how HOA boards could legally enforce fines and where their authority ended. He highlighted key points. Fines must be reasonable, properly documented, and residents must have an opportunity to contest them. Most importantly, the law prohibited punitive or arbitrary fines designed solely to intimidate residents. Laura listened intently, absorbing every detail. "So basically," she said, "they can't just make up rules or charge huge fines for small things?" Michael nodded. "Exactly. And even if they try, we now have the legal knowledge and documentation to protect ourselves." Laura smiled faintly, feeling a small sense of empowerment she hadn't experienced since the ordeal began. The couple decided that their next step would be proactive, rather than reactive. Instead of waiting for another escalation, they would reach out to the HOA formally, armed with both their documentation and legal understanding. Michael began drafting a letter that was firm but polite, laying out the situation, disputing the fine, and requesting that the HOA retract any additional penalties. Laura reviewed the draft, ensuring it remained professional and clear. They wanted to leave no room for misunderstanding or further attempts at intimidation. A few days later, Michael sent the letter via certified mail. He included copies of all previous correspondence, notes from their interactions with the HOA office, and references to the relevant state laws. The goal was simple: to make it impossible for the HOA to continue claiming authority over an unlawful fine. Once the letter was sent, they waited. This time, however, the waiting felt different. Instead of anxiety, there was a sense of anticipation. They had done everything right, and now they were letting the process work in their favor. As they waited, they began talking to some neighbors they trusted, quietly seeking insights into Karen's history with the community. One neighbor, an older man named Mr. Thompson, shared that Karen had a pattern of overreacting to minor issues, often issuing fines that were later disputed successfully. "She likes to see people jump at her letters," he said with a small laugh. "But if you stay calm and follow the rules, she usually loses interest. Just don't let her scare you." Laura and Michael listened carefully, realizing that their strategy was aligning perfectly with this advice: stay calm, stay informed, and rely on facts rather than emotion. A week later, they received a response from the HOA. Laura nervously opened the envelope, expecting confrontation. To her surprise, the letter was brief and conciliatory. It acknowledged receipt of Michael's correspondence, noted that the matter had been reviewed, and stated that the fine would be suspended pending further discussion. The tone was neutral, even slightly respectful. Laura couldn't hide her relief. Michael, however, reminded her to remain cautious. "It's a good sign," he said, "but we need to stay alert. Karen may still try something." True to his prediction, Karen did not remain silent. A few days after the HOA letter, she appeared in front of their house, clipboard in hand, and started inspecting minor details of the yard. Laura noticed her and quickly went inside, closing the blinds. Michael stayed calm, knowing that reacting emotionally would only escalate tension. Instead, he documented Karen's presence from a safe distance, taking photos and notes that would be useful if further disputes arose. Meanwhile, Michael and Laura's careful planning began to pay off in subtle ways. Neighbors who had been quietly frustrated with Karen's behavior started to approach them. Some shared their own experiences, offering support and advice. Others simply expressed gratitude that someone was standing up to unreasonable enforcement. Michael and Laura realized that by handling the situation thoughtfully, they were not only protecting themselves but also inspiring others to take a measured approach. During this period, Michael also arranged a brief meeting with the HOA board, this time in person. He presented his case calmly, citing state law, HOA regulations, and their documented correspondence. His demeanor was firm but respectful, emphasizing that their goal was compliance with legitimate rules, not confrontation. The board listened carefully, and for the first time, they seemed to consider the situation from a legal perspective rather than through Karen's lens of personal authority. Laura noticed a change in Karen's behavior as well. Initially defensive and confrontational, she became more reserved, as if realizing that her attempts at intimidation were no longer effective. The shift was subtle but noticeable. Fewer emails, fewer surprise visits, and a decrease in her attempts to rally neighbors against Michael and Laura. It was clear that the couple's combination of calm professionalism, legal knowledge, and strategic action was starting to have an effect. One afternoon, as they were walking in the neighborhood, a few neighbors approached them with smiles. "We heard about how you handled the fine," one said. "We're really impressed. Most people would have just paid out of fear." Laura felt a warm sense of validation. The experience had been stressful, yes, but it had also strengthened her confidence. She realized that standing up for fairness didn't mean being aggressive. It meant being informed, prepared, and patient. Michael and Laura also took steps to ensure the HOA's rules were fully understood by all residents. They organized a small informational session, inviting neighbors to learn about their rights and responsibilities, and how to respond to unreasonable fines. The turnout was modest, but the atmosphere was supportive. Neighbors shared stories, asked questions, and left with a sense of empowerment. Michael and Laura realized that their experience could serve as a positive example for others, transforming what had begun as a personal struggle into a community lesson. Meanwhile, Karen's influence continued to wane. Her attempts to assert control were less effective now, as more neighbors were aware of their rights and unwilling to be intimidated. Karen still monitored the community, but her power to intimidate had diminished. Michael and Laura's careful, deliberate approach had shifted the balance, demonstrating that knowledge and preparation could overcome fear and aggression. One of the most important lessons for Laura was learning the power of documentation. Every letter, email, photo, and note had contributed to their ability to defend themselves. She realized that staying organized and thorough was not just a legal tactic. It was a way to maintain control and confidence in challenging situations. Michael agreed, noting that preparation often made the difference between stress and empowerment. By the end of this part of the story, Michael and Laura had successfully turned a dire situation into an opportunity for growth and influence. What had begun as a tense and stressful ordeal with Karen and the HOA had become a story of resilience, strategy, and measured action. They had navigated the turning point, demonstrating that patience, knowledge, and composure could change the outcome of even the most intimidating conflicts. For Laura, the experience was transformative. She realized that fear and anxiety could be managed, that unreasonable authority could be challenged thoughtfully, and that their home, once threatened by intimidation, was now a place where fairness and law held sway. Michael's calm guidance, combined with her attention to detail and emotional insight, had created a partnership capable of handling challenges without panic or confrontation. The turning point was not just about winning a dispute, it was about reclaiming their sense of peace and security. They had faced the lowest moments, endured stress, and navigated threats to their dignity, only to emerge stronger and more confident. The HOA fine, once a source of anxiety and intimidation, had become a catalyst for growth and empowerment. Michael and Laura knew the situation was not over entirely. Karen might try other tactics, and minor disputes could still arise. But they now had the tools, confidence, and support network to handle anything with calm and clarity. They had shifted the balance of power, proving that preparation, legal knowledge, and measured action could overcome even the most stubborn forms of intimidation. As the sun set over their quiet neighborhood, Michael and Laura sat on their porch sipping tea and reflecting on the journey so far. The house that had once been a simple dream had become a place of resilience, strategy, and quiet victory. They understood that life in a community could bring unexpected challenges, but they also knew that with patience, knowledge, and unity, they could face any challenge and emerge stronger. The turning point had arrived. What had begun as stress, anxiety, and intimidation had transformed into empowerment, community support, and a clear path forward. Michael and Laura were ready for whatever came next, confident that their approach, calm, informed, and strategic, would guide them to a positive resolution. After weeks of careful planning, communication, and patience, Michael and Laura began to notice a shift in the neighborhood atmosphere. The tension that had once hung over their home like a dark cloud was slowly lifting. Karen's attempts to intimidate them had dwindled. Her emails and letters became less frequent. Her surprise visits stopped, and even casual remarks in the neighborhood carried less bite. It was as if the community itself had acknowledged that Michael and Laura would not be easily swayed, and that reason and law would prevail over petty intimidation. Michael and Laura's strategy of calm persistence had worked. By documenting every interaction, understanding the limits of the HOA's authority, and responding thoughtfully to each escalation, they had created a situation where further attempts at harassment would have been futile. Even Karen, with her determined personality, seemed to recognize that her usual tactics were no longer effective. She continued to live in the neighborhood, but her influence had diminished significantly. One morning, Michael received a formal notice from the HOA confirming that the $3,500 fine had been fully retracted. The letter included a brief acknowledgement that their dispute had been reviewed and that no further action would be taken. Laura read the notice aloud, her voice trembling with relief. "We did it," she whispered, a mixture of disbelief and triumph in her tone. Michael smiled, feeling a quiet satisfaction. The ordeal that had seemed overwhelming weeks ago was finally resolved. While the fine's retraction was a personal victory, the couple realized that the true impact extended beyond their own household. Neighbors who had observed the conflict quietly were inspired by the way Michael and Laura had handled the situation. Some approached them to share their own experiences, Others expressed gratitude for showing that calm, informed action could overcome unreasonable authority. The couple had inadvertently become role models in the community, demonstrating that fairness and knowledge could triumph over intimidation. Michael and Laura also took steps to strengthen the community in ways that would prevent similar situations in the future. They helped organize informational meetings about HOA rules and residents' rights, offering guidance on how to respond to fines or complaints. Attendance was modest at first, but over time more residents began to participate. The sessions became a safe space for sharing experiences, asking questions, and learning how to navigate the sometimes complicated world of community governance. Laura found that the experience had taught her valuable lessons about resilience and confidence. She realized that fear, while natural, could be managed with preparation and knowledge. She also learned that standing up to unreasonable behavior didn't require confrontation or anger. It required clarity, patience, and documentation. These lessons extended beyond the HOA conflict, shaping how she approached challenges in everyday life, both personal and professional. Michael, too, reflected on the broader implications of their experience. As a judge, he had seen countless disputes over property, fines, and rules. But this situation had reminded him that even small conflicts could escalate if unchecked. He understood that patience, fairness, and clear communication were not just principles for the courtroom. They were tools for everyday life, capable of resolving conflicts before they became unmanageable. The couple also noticed subtle changes in Karen's behavior. While she remained a presence in the neighborhood, she no longer exerted the same pressure or control over others. Her reputation as a strict enforcer of rules persisted, but residents who had previously been intimidated now felt empowered to speak up, ask questions, or even challenge unreasonable fines. Michael and Laura's measured approach had created a ripple effect, showing that knowledge and composure could counteract fear and control. One afternoon, as Michael and Laura were enjoying a quiet moment on their porch, a neighbor stopped by to chat. "I heard what happened with the HOA," the neighbor said. "I just want to say you handled that so well. Most people would have just paid or gotten upset, but you stayed calm and followed the rules. It really changed the way we all think about these things." Laura smiled, feeling a sense of pride and connection. The incident, while stressful, had strengthened the bonds within the community and created a sense of mutual respect among neighbors. Michael and Laura also reflected on how the ordeal had strengthened their relationship. Facing a stressful and unexpected challenge together had deepened their trust and communication. Laura appreciated Michael's calm guidance, and Michael valued Laura's emotional insight and attention to detail. They had worked as a team, combining logic and empathy, and the experience had reinforced the importance of partnership in overcoming difficulties. The resolution of the fine also brought a renewed sense of peace to their home. Laura could finally take out the trash without worrying about surveillance or fines. Michael could enjoy quiet evenings on the porch without the weight of unnecessary stress. Their home, once a site of tension and anxiety, had been restored as a place of comfort, safety, and happiness. Over time, the couple noticed that their story became an informal legend in the neighborhood. New residents would hear about the $3,500 fine that was challenged successfully, and how Michael and Laura had remained calm, documented everything, and ultimately prevailed. The story served as both a cautionary tale about unreasonable authority and an inspiring example of how to respond thoughtfully to conflict. It became a reminder that preparation, knowledge, and composure could turn even a stressful situation into an opportunity for growth and empowerment. Michael and Laura also recognized the importance of community engagement. By participating in neighborhood meetings, sharing their experiences, and offering guidance to others, they helped foster a culture of fairness and mutual respect. Residents became more aware of their rights and responsibilities, and the neighborhood gradually shifted from one of quiet tension to one where communication and understanding were valued. The couple understood that the lessons from this experience extended beyond the HOA dispute. They realized that challenges, whether in the form of unreasonable authority, unexpected conflicts, or stress-inducing situations, could be met with patience, preparation, and clear thinking. They had learned to remain calm under pressure, to document interactions thoroughly, and to approach problems strategically rather than emotionally. These skills would serve them well in every aspect of life, In the end, Michael and Laura's story was about more than just a fine. It was about standing up for fairness, maintaining dignity under pressure, and demonstrating that knowledge and preparation are powerful tools against intimidation. Their victory was not just personal, it had a ripple effect throughout the community, empowering neighbors and creating a sense of accountability within the HOA. As the months passed, life returned to a more peaceful rhythm. Michael and Laura enjoyed the quiet mornings, friendly interactions with neighbors, and the comfort of knowing their home was truly their own. Karen remained part of the neighborhood, but her influence had waned. The couple had navigated the lowest points, faced unreasonable challenges, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident than ever. Looking back, Laura often reflected on the lessons learned. She realized that fear and anxiety could be transformed into action and empowerment. She appreciated the value of remaining calm, documenting interactions, and seeking knowledge when faced with challenges. Michael, too, reflected on how the experience reinforced the importance of patience, strategy, and empathy in handling conflicts. Together, they had not only resolved a difficult situation but also contributed to a more informed, supportive, and empowered community. Ultimately, the resolution of the $3,500 fine became a symbol of resilience and fairness. Michael and Laura's experience showed that even when faced with unreasonable authority or intimidation, careful planning, knowledge, and composure could turn the tide. Their story ended not just with the retraction of a fine, but with the creation of a stronger, more confident household and a neighborhood that had learned valuable lessons about fairness, awe, and community support. As they sat together one evening, watching the sunset over their quiet street, Michael and Laura felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The conflict had tested them, challenged them, and at times felt overwhelming, but they had emerged with their dignity intact, their home secure, and their confidence strengthened. Their journey had taught them that fairness, patience, and preparation could overcome fear and intimidation, and that even the most stressful situations could be turned into opportunities for growth, learning, and positive impact.